The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, as 11-year-old Dion helped his mother load plastic containers of food into their old Honda. The car had seen better days, but it got them where they needed to go, and tonight, they were headed to one of the fanciest neighborhoods in the city. "You got your homework in your backpack?" his mother asked, closing the trunk with a firm push. She adjusted her white uniform shirt and smoothed down her black pants, making sure she looked presentable. "Yes, ma'am," Dion replied, sliding into the passenger seat. "I finished most of it during study hall." His mother smiled as she started the car. "That's my boy, always thinking ahead." Dion didn't really want to spend his Friday evening at some rich person's house while his mother worked the catering job, but he knew money was tight since Dad had lost his job at the factory. Besides, his mom had promised he could bring a book, and the catering company owner, Mrs. Chen, always saved him a plate of fancy food to try. As they drove through the city, the neighborhoods gradually changed. Small houses with chain-link fences gave way to larger homes with actual yards, which eventually transformed into massive houses hidden behind tall gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. "Wow," Dion whispered as they pulled up to the security gate of the Henderson estate. A guard in a crisp uniform checked his mother's name on a list and waved them through. The driveway seemed to go on forever, winding through gardens that must have cost more to maintain each month than their entire rent. When the house finally came into view, Dion's jaw dropped. It wasn't a house when it was a mansion, like something from a movie. "Remember what we talked about," his mother said as she parked near a side entrance. "Stay out of the way, be polite if anyone speaks to you, and don't touch anything," Dion finished. "I know, Mom." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "I know you do. You're a good kid. This should only be a few hours. Then we can go home and watch that sci-fi show you like." Inside, the Henderson mansion was even more impressive. The ceilings were so high Dion had to tilt his head all the way back to see them. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, and the floors were so shiny he could almost see his reflection. The air smelled like flowers and expensive perfume. Mrs. Chen greeted them in the kitchen, a bustling space filled with other catering staff in matching uniforms. "Angela, thank goodness you're here. We're short-handed tonight." She smiled at Dion. "And you brought your little helper." Dion didn't feel that little anymore. He was in 6th grade now, but he liked Mrs. Chen, so he smiled back. "He'll stay out of the way," his mother promised. "Maybe that corner spot by the pantry where he can read." Mrs. Chen nodded. "That works, but actually, if he doesn't mind, I could use an extra set of hands passing out the appetizer trays. The Hendersons invited half the city to this fundraiser, I swear." Before Dion could respond, his mother jumped in. "He'd be happy to help. Right, Dion?" Dion nodded. He'd rather be useful than sitting alone anyway. Mrs. Chen handed him a clean white button-up shirt that was slightly too big. "Put this over your t-shirt. You look handsome in blue, but we need to match tonight." 20 minutes later, Dion carefully balanced a tray of tiny foods he couldn't name as he navigated through crowds of adults in fancy clothes. Most people ignored him completely, grabbing appetizers without even looking at him. A few said thank you, which his mother had taught him was the mark of someone with real class, not just money. He did his best to stay invisible, just like his mother had taught him. "We're there to serve, not to be seen," she always said. But it was hard not to stare at everything around him. The paintings on the walls that probably cost more than their car. The sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum. The flowers that must have been flown in from somewhere tropical. After his third trip around the massive living room with a fresh tray, Dion's arms were getting tired. He was about to head back to the kitchen when the crowd shifted and he saw it. A piano unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It was massive and black, polished to a mirror shine, sitting in an alcove near tall windows that looked out onto illuminated gardens. Dion stopped in his tracks, nearly causing a woman in a sparkly dress to bump into him. "Watch it," she muttered, giving him a look before moving on. But Dion barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the piano. His grandmother had an old upright piano in her apartment, where she'd taught him to play simple songs before her arthritis got too bad. After she moved to the assisted living home, Dion would practice on the beat-up piano at the community center whenever he could. Mrs. Washington, who ran the after-school program, said he had a natural talent, but he'd never seen a piano like this one. He drifted closer as if pulled by an invisible string. The guests seemed to part automatically for his tray, though none of them were looking at him. They were all focused on conversations about charity foundations and vacation homes and someone named Senator something or other who might be running for president. The piano sat in a small space partly separated from the main room, almost like it was waiting for him. Dion glanced around. No one was paying attention to the kid with the nearly empty appetizer tray. He stepped closer into the alcove. From here he could see the piano's brand name written in gold script, Steinway & Sons. He'd read about these in a music magazine at the library. This was the kind of piano that professional musicians played in concert halls. The kind that cost more money than he could imagine. He should go back to the kitchen. He knew that. His mother would be worried if he took too long. But the piano was right there, and no one was looking. Dion set his tray down on a nearby table and wiped his hands on his borrowed white shirt. He took a step toward the piano, then another. His heart beat faster with each step, like he was approaching something magical. When he finally stood beside it, he could see his distorted reflection in the polished surface. His fingers itched to touch the keys to feel what a real piano was like. His grandmother's piano had chipped keys and stuck sometimes. The community center piano was always slightly out of tune. But this would be perfect. He glanced over his shoulder. The adults were still deep in their important conversations. Mrs. Chen was nowhere to be seen. His mother was probably still in the kitchen, just one touch, he promised himself. Just to know what it feels like. Slowly, reverently, Dion reached out his hand. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. Then gently, he placed his index finger on a single white key, not pressing down enough to make a sound, just feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath his fingertip. It felt like touching something sacred. He moved his finger to another key, then another, still not pressing down, just feeling the perfect weight and balance of each one. "Hey, what are you doing?" The sharp voice cut through Dion's trance like a knife. He yanked his hand back and spun around to see a boy about his age standing at the entrance to the alcove. The boy wore a suit that probably cost more than all the clothes in Dion's closet combined. His perfectly combed hair and upturned nose gave him the look of someone who was used to getting his way. "I asked what you're doing," the boy repeated, louder this time. Heads turned in their direction. "You're not supposed to touch that. That's my father's Steinway concert grand." Dion's chest tightened. I was just looking." "With your hands?" The boy scoffed. Several adults were watching now, some with curious expressions, others with disapproval. "Do you even know what that is? It costs more than your family probably makes in a year." Heat rushed to Dion's face. He wanted to disappear, to sink through the polished floor and vanish. He took a step back, bumping into the piano bench. "Tyler, what's going on?" A tall man in an expensive suit approached, his expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Dad, one of the serving boys was touching your piano." The boy, Tyler, said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. More people were looking now. Dion spotted his mother across the room, frozen in place with a tray of empty glasses, her eyes wide with concern. She started making her way toward him, but the crowd was thick. The tall man, Mr. Henderson himself, looked Dion up and down. "Were you touching the piano, young man?" Dion swallowed hard. He could lie, but his mother always said that telling the truth was more important than avoiding trouble. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I just wanted to see what it felt like. I didn't play it or anything." Mr. Henderson's expression was unreadable. Tyler smirked beside him, clearly enjoying Dion's discomfort. "That piano is very valuable," Mr. Henderson said. "It's not a toy for the help's children to play with." The words stung worse than if the man had yelled at him. Dion nodded, looking at the floor. "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry, sir." His mother finally reached them, slightly out of breath. "I apologize for my son, Mr. Henderson. It won't happen again." Mr. Henderson waved a dismissive hand. "Just keep him in the kitchen with the rest of the staff." As Dion turned to follow his mother back to the kitchen, Tyler called after him loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, does he even know what a piano is?" Maybe he thought it was some kind of fancy table. A few people laughed, not many, but enough to make Dion's eyes burn with unshed tears. He blinked them back furiously. He wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of these people. His mother's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently as she guided him toward the kitchen. But before they could get there, Dion stopped and turned around. He looked at the piano, then at Tyler, then at Mr. Henderson. Something shifted inside him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something stronger, more determined. Without saying a word, Dion walked back toward the piano. Dion's mother caught his arm. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice tight with worry. "I need to show them something," Dion said quietly, not taking his eyes off the piano. "This isn't the time or place," she pleaded. "Let's just go back to the kitchen." But Dion gently pulled away from her grasp. Something inside him had changed when Tyler laughed at him, when Mr. Henderson had called him the help's child. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like a door had opened inside him, and through it came a courage he didn't know he had. Tyler was still standing by his father, a smug smile on his face as he watched Dion approach. A few guests had turned to observe the unfolding scene, their conversations quieting as they sensed something was about to happen. "Excuse me, sir," Dion said, looking directly at Mr. Henderson. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "May I please play your piano?" Mr. Henderson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Play it?" Tyler laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "You play a Steinway? Do you even know which end the sound comes out of?" A few adults chuckled, though some looked uncomfortable. Dion kept his eyes on Mr. Henderson, waiting for an answer. The tall man seemed unsure how to respond. He glanced at his son, then at the gathering crowd of curious onlookers, then back at Dion. "Young man, this is a very expensive instrument. It's not a toy." "I know, sir," Dion replied. "My grandmother taught me to play before her arthritis got too bad. I practice at the community center whenever I can." A woman in a midnight blue dress stepped forward. She had silver hair styled in an elegant twist and kind eyes that seemed to see right through Dion. "Oh, come now, Richard. Let the boy play if he wants to. What's the harm?" Mr. Henderson hesitated, clearly caught between refusing and appearing unkind in front of his guests. "Very well," he finally said with a sigh. "One song. Make it quick." Tyler's smug smile faltered. "Dad, you can't be serious. He's going to embarrass himself." "Then it will be a valuable lesson for him," Mr. Henderson replied coolly. "And if he damages anything, it comes out of the catering company's payment." Dion's mother stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson, that's not—" "It's okay, Mom," Dion said quietly. "I won't damage anything. I promise." The crowd had grown now, guests drifting over to see what the commotion was about. Dion felt their eyes on him as he walked to the piano bench and sat down. His hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear. It was the same feeling he got before a big test at school, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the keys, letting them rest there for a moment. The piano felt alive beneath his fingers, like it was waiting for him. This was nothing like his grandmother's old upright or the worn-out piano at the community center. This was an instrument made for concert halls and professional musicians. Tyler snickered from somewhere behind him. "This should be good," he whispered, just loud enough for Dion to hear. Dion closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. Then he began to play. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room, gentle and haunting. Dion had learned it from an old book his grandmother had given him, practicing the difficult passages over and over on the community center piano, until his fingers knew the way without him having to think about it. On this magnificent instrument, the music sounded different, richer, fuller, more alive. Each note rang out with perfect clarity, the soft pedal creating a dreamlike quality that matched the piece's name. Dion leaned into the music, letting it flow through him, forgetting the crowd, forgetting Tyler's mockery, forgetting everything except the connection between his fingers and the keys. Behind him, the room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped to listen, trays held motionless in their hands. Dion's mother stood frozen, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she watched her son transform before her eyes, from a nervous boy into a young artist. As Dion moved into the more complex sections of the piece, his fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. This was his element, the place where he felt most himself. Every hour spent practicing on imperfect instruments, every sacrifice his mother had made to keep his grandmother's piano when they could barely afford rent, every moment he'd chosen music over playing basketball with the other kids, it all led to this moment. Tyler's smug smile had vanished completely. replaced by a look of disbelief. His father stood beside him, martini glass halfway to his lips, forgotten as he stared at the boy he'd dismissed moments ago as the help's child. The silver-haired woman who had spoken up for Dion was watching with an intensity that might have unnerved him if he'd noticed. Her eyes never left his hands as they moved across the keyboard, and she occasionally nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. As Dion neared the end of the first movement, he felt something he rarely experienced when playing, a sense of complete freedom. The perfect action of the Steinway's keys, the balanced weight of the pedals, the rich resonance of its strings, everything responded exactly as it should, allowing him to express himself without fighting against the limitations of a lesser instrument. The final notes lingered in the air, and for a moment no one moved or spoke. Then someone began to applaud, followed quickly by another, and suddenly the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Dion opened his eyes, slightly dazed, as if waking from a dream. He turned on the bench to see a crowd much larger than before. Nearly everyone at the party had gathered to listen. Some were smiling, others looked astonished, and a few were whispering to each other behind their hands. His mother was beaming through her tears, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Mr. Henderson's expression had completely transformed. Gone was the dismissive annoyance, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Tyler stood beside his father, his face flushed with embarrassment. The silver-haired woman stepped forward, her applause continuing longer than the others. "Bravo, young man," she said when the room had quieted again. "That was beautifully played." "Where did you learn to play like that?" Dion swallowed, suddenly shy now that the music had stopped. "My grandmother taught me the basics, ma'am. Then I just practiced a lot. The community center lets me use their piano when no one else needs the room." "And how old are you?" she asked. 11, ma'am. Almost 12 next month." The woman nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I thought so. You have remarkable technique for someone your age." She turned to Dion's mother. "You must be very proud." "I am," his mother replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I had no idea he could play like that. He usually practices when I'm at work." The woman raised an eyebrow. "He's never had formal lessons?" His mother shook her head. "We couldn't. That is, it wasn't something we could fit into our budget." "I see." The woman reached into a small purse and pulled out a business card, which she handed to Dion's mother. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Phillips. I'm the director of the Westbrook Academy of Music. I would very much like to speak with you about your son's education." Dion's mother took the card with a trembling hand. "Thank you, but I'm not sure we could—" "We have scholarships," Dr. Phillips interrupted gently, "for students with exceptional talent." She looked at Dion. "Would you play something else for us? Something with a bit more fire, perhaps?" Dion looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly despite the worry still visible in her eyes. He turned back to the piano, considering his limited repertoire. There was one piece he'd been working on for months, a challenging composition that had fascinated him from the first time he'd heard it on a YouTube video. He wasn't sure if he could play it perfectly, but something told him this was the moment to try. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hands on the keys again and launched into Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. The rapid notes tumbled out like a waterfall, his fingers flying across the keys at a speed that made several guests gasp. The contrasting middle section sang out with longing, before returning to the whirlwind of notes that made this piece famous. Dion had never played it so well before. The perfect action of the Steinway keys made the difficult passages easier, allowing him to focus on the emotion of the music rather than the technical challenges. He swayed slightly as he played, lost in the storm of sound he was creating. Tyler watched with his mouth slightly open, all traces of mockery gone from his face. His father had set down his drink and was watching with undisguised amazement. Several guests had taken out their phones and were recording the performance, while others simply stood in stunned silence. Dr. Phillips nodded as she listened, occasionally closing her eyes to focus on a particular passage. When Dion finished with a flourish, the applause was immediate and thunderous. Someone in the back of the room whistled appreciatively. Dion stood up from the bench, his legs slightly wobbly. The rush of playing such a difficult piece perfectly had left him lightheaded. He looked for his mother and found her wiping tears from her cheeks even as she applauded. Young man, Mr. Henderson said, stepping forward and extending his hand. I owe you an apology. That was extraordinary. Dion shook the man's hand, not quite sure what to say. Thank you for letting me play your piano, sir. It's the most beautiful instrument I've ever touched. Well, you're welcome to play it any time you visit, Mr. Henderson replied, looking slightly embarrassed by his earlier behavior. Tyler hung back behind his father, avoiding Dion's eyes. Mrs. Chen appeared at Dion's side, her usual businesslike demeanor replaced by an expression of wonder. Dion, she exclaimed, why didn't you tell me you could play like that? My goodness. Before Dion could answer, Dr. Phillips rejoined them after a brief conversation with Dion's mother. Dion, she said, how would you feel about auditioning for our scholarship program at Westbrook? Based on what I've heard tonight, I think you have a very good chance of being accepted. Dion's heart leaped into his throat. Westbrook Academy was famous. He'd read about it in music magazines. Some of the best musicians in the country had studied there. I'd like that very much, ma'am, he managed to say. Dr. Phillips smiled. Excellent. I've given your mother all the details. She looked at Mr. Henderson. Richard, I hope you'll consider supporting our scholarship fund this year. We have many talented young musicians who lack only the opportunity to develop their gifts. Mr. Henderson nodded, glancing from Dion to his own son, who was still standing awkwardly to the side. I believe I will, Eleanor. In fact, put me down for twice what I gave last year. The ride home that night was nothing like Dion had expected. Instead of the quiet trip with his mother telling him about the fancy food she'd served or the strange requests from rich people, they rode in near silence, both trying to process what had happened. You never told me you could play like that, his mother finally said as they turned onto their street. The streetlights cast moving shadows across her face, but Dion could see she was still stunned. I didn't know I could play like that, Dion admitted. Not really. That piano. It was different. It felt like it was helping me play. His mother pulled into their small driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of them made a move to get out of the car. Dr. Phillips wants you to audition next Saturday, she said, turning to face him. She thinks you could get a full scholarship. Dion's heart jumped. Really, like lessons and everything. More than lessons. It's a full program. Music theory, composition, performance technique. She says students who show exceptional talent can even get placed with private tutors. She paused, studying his face. It would mean a lot of work, Dion. A lot of practice. A lot of giving up other things. I know, he said, though he wasn't sure he fully understood what it would mean. All he knew was that when he played tonight, he'd felt something he'd never felt before, like he'd found a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. His mother reached over and took his hand. I'm so proud of you. Your grandmother would be over the moon if she could have seen you tonight. The mention of his grandmother brought tears to Dion's eyes. She'd been the one who first noticed how he was always tapping rhythms on the table, how he'd stand on tiptoes as a toddler to reach the keys of her old piano. You've got music in your bones, she used to tell him. Can we call Grandma tomorrow and tell her? He asked. His mother nodded. First thing in the morning, the week that followed was a blur. Dion went to school as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. His friends noticed he was distracted, especially during lunch when he'd tap his fingers on the table playing invisible songs. What's up with you? His friend Luis asked on Wednesday. You've been weird all week. Dion hesitated. He hadn't told anyone at school about what happened at the Henderson house, partly because he wasn't sure they'd believe him, and partly because it felt like a dream that might disappear if he talked about it too much. I might be getting music lessons, he finally said. Like serious ones. Luis nodded, clearly unimpressed. Cool. You still coming to my birthday party on Saturday? Dion's heart sank. Luis's birthday party. He'd completely forgotten. I can't. I have an appointment. An appointment? On Saturday? Luis looked skeptical. It's an audition, Dion admitted. For Westbrook Academy. Luis's eyes widened. The fancy music school? For real? Word spread quickly after that. By Friday, it seemed like everyone in his grade knew about Dion's audition. Some kids were impressed, others teased him about becoming all fancy, and a few just seemed confused why anyone would give up a Saturday for something related to school. His math teacher, Mr. Gonzalez, caught him after class. I heard about your audition, he said. That's a big deal, Dion. You know about Westbrook? Dayon asked, surprised. Mr. Gonzalez smiled. My cousin went there for violin. Changed his life. He plays with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra now. He gave Dion's shoulder a squeeze. Remember, no matter what happens tomorrow, the fact that you got an audition at all says something important about your talent. Saturday morning arrived with a knot of nerves in Dion's stomach. His mother had taken the day off work, something she rarely did, and they'd splurged on a taxi rather than taking the bus to make sure they arrived on time. The Westbrook Academy of Music was housed in a stately old building downtown. As they climbed the wide stone steps to the entrance, Dion felt small and out of place. His mother had ironed his best shirt and pants, but he still felt underdressed compared to the other kids arriving with their parents. Many carried instrument cases and wore clothes that looked new and expensive. Inside, the hallways echoed with distant music, a violin somewhere, a trumpet elsewhere, a chorus of voices from behind a closed door. They found the registration table where a friendly woman with glasses checked Dion's name on a list. Ah, Dr. Phillips's special referral, she said with a smile. She doesn't often fast-track candidates like this. You must have impressed her. She directed them to a waiting area where other children and their parents sat on cushioned benches. Some of the kids were practicing quietly, fingers moving in silent patterns on imaginary instruments. Others looked as nervous as Dion felt, sitting rigidly beside parents who seemed equally tense. A tall boy with curly red hair was sitting directly across from them. He had a folder of sheet music open on his lap. His eyes closed as his fingers twitched in time with music only he could hear. His mother, a thin woman with the same red hair, noticed Dion watching. Preston's been preparing for months, she said, her voice carrying a hint of pride and challenge. He studies with Professor Liu. This will be his second audition. Dion's mother nodded politely but said nothing. Dion could feel her tension beside him, though she tried to hide it. A door opened and a young woman with a clipboard appeared. Preston Cooper, she called. The red-haired boy stood gathering his music. His mother adjusted his tie and whispered something in his ear before he followed the woman through the door. What if I mess up? Dion whispered to his mother once Preston had gone. Then you mess up, she replied simply. The sun will still rise tomorrow. Dion smiled despite his nerves. It was something his grandmother used to say whenever he was worried about a test or a basketball game. Somehow, hearing it now made the fancy building and the intimidating audition seem less important. They waited nearly 30 minutes before Preston emerged from the audition room. His face was flushed and he was smiling as he rejoined his mother. They said I showed remarkable technical proficiency, he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Before Dion could worry about what that meant for his own chances, the woman with the clipboard appeared again. Dion Harris, she called. His mother squeezed his hand. Remember who you are, she whispered. The audition room was larger than Dion had expected, with high ceilings and tall windows letting in streams of natural light. At the center sat a grand piano, not quite as magnificent as the Henderson Steinway, but still far nicer than anything Dion was used to playing. 3 people sat at a table to one side. An older man with wire-rimmed glasses, a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and Dr. Phillips, who smiled encouragingly when she saw him. Welcome, Dion, Dr. Phillips said. These are my colleagues, Professor Whitman and Miss Chen. No relation to your mother's employer, I believe. Dion nodded nervously. Hello? Dr. Phillips has told us about your remarkable performance at the Henderson fundraiser, Professor Whitman said, peering at Dion over his glasses. It's not often we hear of someone with no formal training tackling Chopin's Fantaisie impromptu. We'd like to hear you play something for us, Ms. Chen added. Do you have a piece prepared? Dion hesitated. He hadn't thought to prepare anything specific. At the Henderson house, he'd played what he felt in the moment. I could play the Moonlight Sonata again, or the Chopin piece. Why don't you play whatever you feel most comfortable with, Dr. Phillips suggested. Dion approached the piano and sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. As he played, he noticed the difference between this piano and the Henderson's Steinway. This one was slightly brighter in tone, less mellow. He adjusted his touch, pressing more gently to capture the dreamy quality the piece demanded. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before Professor Whitman spoke. Very expressive playing, young man. Now I'd like to test your ear. He stood and walked to the piano, gently moving Dion to the side. Listen to this progression and see if you can repeat it. He played a complex series of chords, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. Dion listened intently, trying to memorize the pattern and the individual notes. When Professor Whitman finished, Dion took his place at the piano again. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the progression in his mind, then began to play. He missed a few notes in the middle section, but managed to capture the overall structure. Impressive, Ms. Chen murmured, making a note on her clipboard. One more test, Dr. Phillips said. Dion, how do you feel about improvisation? Improvisation? Dion repeated, not entirely sure what she meant. Playing something you make up on the spot, she explained, perhaps based on a simple theme. She hummed a short melody, just 5 notes. Dion listened, then played the melody back. It was simple enough. Then, almost without thinking, he began to build on it, adding harmonies with his left hand, extending the melody with his right. He let the music take him where it wanted to go, building to a crescendo before returning to the original 5-note theme. When he finished, all 3 judges were smiling. Well, Professor Whitman said, I think we've seen what we needed to see. They asked him a few questions after that, how long he'd been playing, what music he liked to listen to, whether he'd ever tried composing his own pieces. Dion answered as honestly as he could, feeling less nervous with each question. Finally, Dr. Phillips stood. Thank you, Dion. You can return to the waiting area now. We'll be making our decisions by the end of the day. Back in the waiting area, his mother looked up expectantly. How did it go? I think. Good, Dion said. They had me play, then repeat some chords, then make up my own music. His mother smiled. That sounds like you did great. They sat in silence for a while, watching as other children were called in for their auditions. Some emerged looking confident, others close to tears. Dion tried not to think about what it would mean if he didn't get accepted. After what felt like hours, Dr. Phillips appeared in the waiting area. The room immediately fell silent as parents and children looked up expectantly. We'll be calling each of you in individually to discuss the results of your audition, she announced. Preston Cooper, you're first. Preston and his mother followed Dr. Phillips through a different door than the one leading to the audition room. They returned about 10 minutes later, Preston looking pleased but somewhat subdued. Several more names were called before Dr. Phillips finally said, Dion Harris. Dion and his mother stood and followed Dr. Phillips to a small office. Professor Whitman and Ms. Chen were already seated inside. Please sit down, Dr. Phillips said, gesturing to 2 chairs facing the desk. Dion's heart pounded as they took their seats. This was it. Whatever happened next would change everything. Dion sat perfectly still in the chair, afraid that any movement might somehow change what Dr. Phillips was about to say. Beside him, his mother's hand found his and squeezed gently. Dr. Phillips smiled as she opened a folder on her desk. First, I want to thank you both for coming today. Audition days are always stressful, and you handled it wonderfully, Dion. Thank you, Dion managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Professor Whitman adjusted his glasses. Young man, we've been conducting these auditions for many years. We see hundreds of talented children, most of whom have been taking formal lessons since they were 4 or 5 years old. Dion's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a rejection. Ms. Chen picked up where Professor Whitman left off. What we rarely see is raw natural talent of the kind you demonstrated today. Your technique needs refinement, of course. That's to be expected without formal training. But your musicality, your ear, and your intuitive understanding of the emotional core of the music is, well, quite extraordinary. Dion blinked, not sure he was understanding correctly. Dr. Phillips leaned forward. What my colleagues are trying to say, Dion, is that we would like to offer you a full scholarship to Westbrook Academy, beginning immediately with our spring session. The words hung in the air for a moment before Dion fully processed them. I got in? You more than got in, Dr. Phillips said, her smile widening. We're creating a special accelerated program for you. You'll have regular classes with the other students, but also private lessons with Professor Whitman twice a week to help you catch up on theory and technique. Dion's mother's grip on his hand tightened. That's very generous, she said cautiously. But I need to understand what this means practically. We don't live in this neighborhood. Transportation would be. Part of the scholarship includes transportation, Dr. Phillips assured her. We can arrange for a car service to bring Dion to and from school each day. And what about his regular school? He can't just drop out. Of course not, Professor Whitman said. Westbrook is an after-school program. Dion would continue his regular education, then come here from 3:30 to 6:30 p.m., Monday through Thursday plus Saturday mornings. Dion's mother nodded slowly, processing this information. That's a lot of time. A lot of commitment. It is, Dr. Phillips agreed. And we don't make this offer lightly. This level of scholarship is reserved for students we believe have the potential for truly exceptional achievement. Ms. Chen opened another folder. We've prepared some information for you to take home and review. It includes details about the program, expectations for practice time, performance opportunities, and so on. We don't need an answer today, but we would like to know by the end of next week if possible. Dion's mother took the folder, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. Thank you. We'll discuss it and let you know. Before you go, Dr. Phillips said, there's one more thing. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope, which she handed to Dion. This is a special invitation. The Henderson family is hosting a benefit concert for our scholarship fund next month. Several of our advanced students will be performing, and we'd like Dion to be among them. Dion stared at the envelope in his hands. You want me to play? In front of people? Like a real concert? Professor Whitman chuckled. That is generally what happens at a benefit concert, yes. But I'm not even a student yet, Dion protested. Consider it your debut, Dr. Phillips said. A chance to show the donors exactly why our scholarship program is so important. The drive home was very different from the one a week ago. This time, instead of stunned silence, Dion and his mother talked nonstop, trying to wrap their heads around everything that had happened. Do you think I should do it? Dion asked as they turned onto their street. The scholarship, I mean. His mother was quiet for a moment. It's a big opportunity, she finally said. But it's also a big commitment. You'd be giving up a lot. Time with friends, basketball, just being a regular kid. I know, Dion said. But when I play, it feels right. Like it's what I'm supposed to be doing. His mother parked the car and turned to look at him. Then I think you have your answer. She smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in it. Your grandmother always said you had a gift. I just didn't realize how special that gift was. That night, Dion called his grandmother at the assisted living facility to tell her the news. She cried with joy, telling him how proud she was, making him promise to play for her the next time they visited. I always knew, she kept saying. From the first time your tiny fingers touched my old piano, I knew you had something special in you. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Dion started his classes at Westbrook, struggling at first with music theory and notation but excelling in his practical lessons. Professor Whitman was demanding but kind, pushing Dion to refine his natural abilities with proper technique. Your hands are already developing good habits, he told Dion during their second lesson. But now we need to make those habits deliberate, not accidental. Meanwhile, Dion had to choose and prepare a piece for the benefit concert. After much discussion with Professor Whitman, they settled on Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, challenging enough to showcase Dion's abilities, but not so difficult that he would struggle to perfect it in the limited time available. At home, Dion practiced on a digital keyboard that Dr. Phillips had arranged for him to borrow. It wasn't the same as a real piano, but it was far better than nothing. He practiced every night after finishing his regular homework, sometimes until his mother had to remind him that it was past his bedtime. His friends at school noticed the change in him. Some were supportive, like Luis, who bragged to everyone that his best friend was going to be the next Mozart or something. Others were less enthusiastic, teasing him about becoming too good for them now that he was going to a fancy music school. The night of the benefit concert arrived all too quickly. The Henderson mansion was transformed, with the large living room now set up like a concert hall. Rows of chairs faced a small stage area where the Steinway grand piano, the very one that had started all of this, gleamed under carefully positioned lights. Backstage, which was actually just a separate room down the hall, Dion peered through a crack in the door at the gathering crowd. He spotted his mother in the third row wearing her best dress. Beside her sat his grandmother, who had insisted on coming despite her arthritis. Mr. Gonzalez, His math teacher was there too, along with Mrs. Chen from the catering company and several of her staff who had been there that fateful night. And, of course, the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Mrs. Henderson moved through the crowd, elegant in a shimmering blue dress, and there was Tyler looking uncomfortable in a suit, hanging back near one of the tall windows. Nervous? Dion turned to find Dr. Phillips standing behind him. She was dressed formally in a black suit, her silver hair swept up in an elegant style. A little, Dion admitted. A lot, actually, Dr. Phillips smiled. That's normal. Even the most experienced performers get nervous. The trick is to use that energy, not let it use you. Dion nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. You're performing last, she reminded him. The place of honor. Just remember to breathe, take your time, and play from your heart like you did that first night. The concert began with performances by some of Westbrook's more advanced students. Dion watched from backstage, amazed at their skill and confidence. A girl not much older than him played a complicated violin piece that made the audience burst into enthusiastic applause. Preston, the red-haired boy from the audition, performed a Bach prelude with technical precision that left Dion feeling intimidated. Finally, it was Dion's turn. Dr. Phillips stepped onto the stage to introduce him. Our final performer tonight is our newest scholarship recipient, a young man with extraordinary natural talent who reminds us all why programs like ours are so vital. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dion Harris. Dion walked onto the stage, his legs feeling like they might give out beneath him. The lights were brighter than he expected, making it hard to see the audience clearly. He gave a small bow as he'd been taught, then sat at the piano. For a terrifying moment, his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember the first note of the piece he'd been practicing for weeks. Then he saw his mother in the audience, smiling encouragingly, and his grandmother beside her, her eyes shining with tears of pride. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. The nocturne started softly, almost tentatively, like a question being asked. As Dion played, he forgot about the audience, forgot about his nerves, forgot about everything, except the music flowing from his fingers. The middle section grew more complex, with delicate ornamentations that Professor Whitman had spent hours helping him perfect. Then back to the main theme, gentle but more confident now, like an answer to that initial question. As he played the final notes, letting them fade away into silence, Dion felt a sense of completion. Not just of the piece, but of a journey that had begun when he first touched the Hendersons' piano weeks ago. The silence held for a moment before the audience erupted into applause. Dion stood and bowed, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. As he looked out at the audience, he saw his mother and grandmother on their feet, applauding wildly. Next to them, Mr. Gonzalez whistled enthusiastically. Dr. Phillips joined him on stage, putting an arm around his shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen, Dion Harris. The applause grew louder. Even from the stage, Dion could see that some people were wiping away tears. As he took another bow, Dion's eyes found Tyler Henderson in the crowd. The boy who had mocked him was applauding too, a look of grudging respect on his face. When their eyes met, Tyler gave a small nod of acknowledgement. After the concert, there was a reception where the donors could meet the performers. Dion found himself surrounded by adults who wanted to shake his hand and tell him how moved they were by his playing. It was overwhelming but also thrilling. His mother and grandmother finally made their way to him, both of them hugging him tightly. You were magnificent, his grandmother whispered in his ear. I always knew you would be. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Mr. Henderson approached them. He looked different somehow, less intimidating than he had that first night. Mrs. Harris, Dion, he said with a nod. I wanted to congratulate you personally. That was a remarkable performance. Thank you, sir, Dion replied. Mr. Henderson hesitated, then added, I also wanted to apologize again for how you were treated the first time you were in our home. It was not our finest moment. Before Dion or his mother could respond, Tyler appeared at his father's side. He looked uncomfortable, but there was none of the mockery from before. That was really good, he said to Dion, not quite meeting his eyes. Do you think... would you maybe give me some pointers sometime? I'm supposed to be learning piano too, but I'm not very good at it. Dion was so surprised that for a moment he didn't know what to say. Then he nodded. Sure. I guess I could do that. Mr. Henderson looked from his son to Dion with an expression that might have been approval. Perhaps we could arrange something through Westbrook. I understand you'll both be part of the program now. You're joining Westbrook? Dion asked Tyler. Tyler shrugged, looking embarrassed. Starting next week. Dad thought it would be. Character building. Dion couldn't help but smile at that. Who would have thought that the boy who mocked him would end up following in his footsteps? As they left the Henderson mansion that night, Dion looked back at the place where everything had changed for him. From being mocked as the helps child to receiving a standing ovation in the same room, it felt like something from a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was his life now. A life filled with music, with opportunity, with possibilities he had never imagined. His grandmother squeezed his hand as they walked to the car. Remember this feeling, she told him. Remember that your gift can open doors, can change minds, can touch hearts. But most importantly, remember that it's not the only thing that defines you. Dion nodded, understanding what she meant. The music was his gift, but how he used it, that would be his choice. 3 years had passed since that night at the Henderson mansion. 3 years of hard work, challenges, triumphs, and growth. Dion, now 14, sat in the backstage area of Symphony Hall, trying to control his breathing as he listened to the sounds of the audience filing in. You've got this, his mother said, straightening his bow tie for the third time. Just like we practiced. Dion nodded, too nervous to speak. This wasn't just another recital or school performance. Tonight, he would be playing with the city's symphony orchestra as the featured young artist, the youngest ever selected for this honor. His grandmother, seated in a wheelchair beside them, reached out to take his hand. Her arthritis had worsened over the years, her once nimble fingers now gnarled and stiff, but her grip was still strong. Remember what I always tell you, she said. Dion smiled. The sun will still rise tomorrow. That's right, she nodded. But tonight you're going to shine brighter than that sun. A stagehand appeared at the door. 5 minutes, Dion. Your family should take their seats now. His mother kissed his cheek. We'll be right in the front row. I love you. Love you too, Dion replied. His grandmother squeezed his hand one more time before his mother wheeled her out. Left alone, Dion closed his eyes and recalled the journey that had brought him here. After the benefit concert 3 years ago, his life had changed completely. Westbrook Academy had become his second home. Professor Whitman had pushed him harder than he'd ever been pushed before, breaking down and rebuilding his technique, teaching him to read music fluently, guiding him through the works of the great composers. There had been setbacks too. Moments of frustration when a piece seemed impossible to master. Times when he'd wanted to quit, to go back to being a normal kid who played basketball after school instead of spending hours at the piano. Nights when his hands ached and his eyes burned from reading sheet music. But there had also been incredible moments of joy. His first solo recital at Westbrook, winning the regional young musicians competition, being selected to attend a prestigious summer music camp in New York, where he'd met young pianists from around the world. And through it all, his mother and grandmother had been his constant support, never missing a performance, always ready with encouragement when he struggled. Even the Hendersons had remained in his life in an unexpected way. True to his word, Mr. Henderson had become one of Westbrook's most generous donors, establishing a permanent scholarship fund that now supported 15 students from underprivileged backgrounds. And Tyler. That had been the biggest surprise. The boy who had once mocked Dion had indeed joined Westbrook, though he'd switched from piano to cello after a few months. Over time, a cautious friendship had formed between them, built on their shared love of music and strengthened by Tyler's genuine remorse for how he'd behaved. 2 minutes, the stagehand called, bringing Dion back to the present. He stood and straightened his tuxedo jacket, a gift from Dr. Phillips for this special occasion. Through the curtain he could hear the orchestra warming up, the familiar chaos of instruments gradually finding harmony. Tonight he would be performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beloved and challenging works in the piano repertoire. Even 3 years ago, he couldn't have imagined tackling such a piece. But Professor Whitman had believed he was ready, and after months of preparation, Dion had come to believe it too. It's time, the stagehand said, holding the curtain aside. Dion took one last deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted him was thunderous. The hall was packed, every seat filled. In the front row, just as promised, sat his mother and grandmother. Beside them were Professor Whitman, Dr. Phillips, and Ms. Chen. A few rows back, he spotted Mr. Henderson and Tyler, both giving him encouraging nods. But it was the person seated at the end of the second row that nearly made Dion miss a step. Mrs. Washington, from the community center, the woman who had let him practice on their old, out-of-tune piano when he had nowhere else to go. She was beaming with pride, as if she'd always known this moment would come. Dion reached the grand piano at center stage and bowed to the audience, then to the conductor. As he sat down at the bench, adjusting it slightly, a calm settled over him. This was where he belonged. The conductor raised his baton and the orchestra began the concerto's famous opening chords. Dion counted silently, waiting for his entrance. When the moment came, his fingers found the keys with confidence, and the music poured out of him. The first movement was passionate and dramatic, with the piano and orchestra engaged in a kind of conversation, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint. Dion lost himself in the music, his years of training allowing his fingers to find their way while his mind remained free to express the emotion of the piece. During the second movement, slower, more contemplative, he glanced briefly at his grandmother. Her eyes were closed, tears streaming down her face as she listened. This movement had always been her favorite. The third movement began with a burst of energy that carried through to the triumphant conclusion. As Dion played the final chords, the audience rose to their feet, applauding and cheering. He stood and bowed, his heart pounding with exhilaration. The conductor shook his hand warmly, and the concertmaster stood to lead the orchestra in their own applause for him. It was a moment Dion knew he would remember for the rest of his life. After the concert, the lobby was crowded with well-wishers. Dion moved through them in a daze, accepting congratulations and compliments, signing programs for younger children who looked at him with the same awe he had once felt watching advanced students at Westbrook. Finally, he reached his family. His mother hugged him tightly, too overcome with emotion to speak. His grandmother held his face in her hands, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "You played just like I always knew you could," she whispered. Professor Whitman clapped him on the shoulder. "Magnificent performance, Dion. Simply magnificent. The New York Academy has been asking about you," Dr. Phillips said with a knowing smile. "Their pre-college program is one of the best in the country." Dion's eyes widened. "New York, really?" Before Dr. Phillips could respond, Mrs. Washington made her way to them. "I hope you don't mind that I came," she said. "When I saw your name on the program, I had to be here." "I'm so glad you came," Dion said, hugging her. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "That old piano at the center has never sounded as good as it did when you played it," she replied. "The kids still talk about you, you know. You've become something of a legend." Dion laughed. "I'm not a legend. I just got lucky." "It wasn't luck," his grandmother said firmly. "It was talent, hard work, and courage." Tyler approached then, holding a bouquet of flowers. "These are from our family," he said, handing them to Dion's mother. "And this is from me." He gave Dion a small wrapped package. Curious, Dion opened it to find a framed photograph of the two of them at a Westbrook recital the previous year, both smiling widely at the camera. "So you don't forget where you came from when you're famous," Tyler said with a smile. "Speaking of not forgetting," Mr. Henderson said, joining the group, "I have something to show you. Dion." He pulled out his phone and showed Dion a photo of a classroom filled with brand new keyboards. "The Henderson Music Initiative. We're bringing music education to public schools across the city, starting with yours. We'd like you to be our official ambassador if you're interested." Dion was speechless. The thought of other kids like him having opportunities they might otherwise never get, it meant more to him than any applause or accolades. "I'd be honored," he finally managed to say. Later that night, after the celebrations and congratulations, after the talk of New York and future opportunities, Dion sat alone at the kitchen table in their small apartment. His mother had gone to help his grandmother get ready for bed, and the house was quiet. He thought about how his life had changed in just 3 years. From a boy who practiced on a worn-out community center piano, to a young musician with a future bright with possibility. From being mocked for touching a rich boy's piano, to performing with a professional orchestra. The journey hadn't been easy, There had been sacrifices, birthday parties missed, movies unseen, basketball games unplayed. There had been days when the pressure felt overwhelming, when he questioned if it was all worth it. But then there were moments like tonight, when the music flowed through him and connected him to something larger than himself, when he saw the pride in his grandmother's eyes and knew he was fulfilling the promise she had always seen in him, when he realized that his journey might help clear the path for others. His mother returned to the kitchen and sat across from him. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Dion smiled. "I was just thinking about that night at the Hendersons, how different everything might have been if I hadn't gone back to that piano." "You were always going to find your way to music," his mother said. "That night just sped things up a bit. Do you think Grandma's right? That it wasn't just luck?" His mother reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "I know she's right. Luck might have put you in that room with that piano, but it was your talent that made them listen. It was your hard work that got you on that stage tonight, and it was your courage that made you walk back to that piano when everyone was laughing." Dion nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Dr. Phillips mentioned New York. His mother continued, "What do you think about that?" "It sounds amazing," Dion admitted, "but it's so far away. I'd have to live in a dormitory. We'd have to figure out the money, even with a scholarship." "We'll figure it out," his mother said confidently. "We always do. The question is it what you want?" Dion thought about it. "I want to keep learning. I want to see how far I can go with this gift. But I also want to help other kids like me, like Mr. Henderson's music initiative." "You can do both," his mother assured him. "That's the beautiful thing about where you are now. You have choices. Choices." 3 years ago, sitting in the car outside the Henderson mansion, he hadn't felt like he had many choices at all. Now the world seemed full of them. "Whatever you decide," his mother said, "we're behind you. Me, your grandmother, all the people who were there tonight. You've touched a lot of lives, Dion." He smiled, thinking of Mrs. Washington and the kids at the community center, of the young children who had asked for his autograph tonight, of future students who might benefit from the Henderson Music Initiative. From one moment of courage, walking back to that piano when everyone expected him to slink away in shame, had come all of this. Not just opportunities for himself, but the chance to open doors for others. "I think Grandma was right about something else too," Dion said. "What's that?" "Music isn't just about playing the notes. It's about connecting with people, showing them something they might not have seen otherwise." His mother smiled. "She always did say you were wise beyond your years." She stood and kissed the top of his head. "Get some rest. You've had quite a night." As Dion lay in bed that night, he thought about the journey ahead. New York, perhaps. New challenges, certainly. But whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage that had led him back to the piano that night 3 years ago. The boy who had been mocked for touching a rich boy's piano had found his voice. And now he was ready to help others find theirs too,